We're going to move on now to our next speaker, and that's Francine Sporenda. She is, let me get the thing. Francine Sporenda is French-American and has a PhD with a specialization in history of political ideas. After a stint in journalism, she taught at SAIS, Johns Hopkins in Washington, D.C. She is now living in France and runs the site Révolution Féministe, and just published Survivre à la prostitution, les voix qui n'en veulent pas attendre, which is survive prostitution, the voices that they don't want us to hear. But Francine, you can make that even better, more clear than me, if you would. Thank you so much, Francine, for talking to us. And I need to give the title of your talk, which is The Poisoned Gifts of Patriarchy. So over to you, Francine Sporenda.
One thing which is of interest to me is how the patriarchal system evolved and has evolved from archaic forms where the subordination of women is obtained by open coercion and violence and backed ideologically by patriarchal religions, to forms adapted to modern Western human rights societies claiming to be egalitarian. In these societies, violence and coercion cannot be used openly, so the strategies of control must be different. And I'll call this system neo-patriarchy. See, if I had to define this system, I would say it's mostly, but not only, an adaptive response to the advances of women's rights and to feminist ideas. And so, of course, patriarchy evolves also according to to socioeconomic changes, in particular changes resulting from the triumph of neo-liberal ideology in the world, which started in the 80s with Reagan and Thatcher. So it's interesting to note that not only patriarchal strategies change, but also the goals as well. For instance, in most traditional patriarchal societies, males want to keep the children after a divorce, in particular male children, and the existing laws protect these paternal rights. In Western countries, children can no longer work, the law doesn't allow it, and financially, therefore, they cannot provide an income to the family, and they won't support their parents financially when they grow old. So they are not a source of income for the family, and quite the opposite, because they cost a lot of money to raise. So Western men are not so eager anymore to keep the children after a divorce, and in many cases are quite happy to let the mother assume total responsibility for them, the care and the financial upkeep. I'll go back to that later. I also observed an interesting trend. When a woman and a man get married or decide to live together, it's often the man who insists to have a child, whereas the woman is not so enthusiastic at first. But the man usually wins because he promises he will share the parental work. When the baby is born and the going gets rough, when men realize the amount of work involved, they tend to disengage. They don't keep their word about helping the mother, and some of them even leave. And it's worse when the child is autistic or has some form of other health problem. And I think that the reason why many of the male abuses, which are typical of neo-patriarchy, have not been covered, or not much, by feminists, it's because they have not been clearly identified. In fact, since a number of these forms of abuse are relatively recent, either they are not seen or they are even identified as progress for women. Changes in the ways and forms of the patriarchal system are often mistaken for a decline of patriarchy. And very often it's not that the system is in decline, it's just that it's reinventing itself to perpetuate itself. But many women and even feminists can be fooled about that. It's not because patriarchy now looks different from what it was in Europe about 150 years ago that is declining. Change and decline are two different things. One of the typical aspects of neo-patriarchy is what I call the boomerang effect, a new social trend or reform, which is a real improvement in the legal rights or options open to women. The system turns it into a major material gain for men. For instance, divorce. It's a typical example of this boomerang effect, and it's been identified by feminists for a long time, in fact. So, having the possibility, the legal possibility for a woman to escape a tyrannical, abusive, and violent husband was and is still an essential step in the protection of women against male sexual and physical abuse. We know now that divorce often results in a deteriorated financial situation, even in poverty for women. The figures for the UK and France are close. When they divorce, women on average lose about 30% of their income in the UK and 35% in France. And of course, their economic situation deteriorates even more if they have children. According to the statistics I have, men don't lose hardly anything, when they separate. And even I have read that their income increases. So a legal option, which was a lifesaver for women trapped in bad marriages, has been turned to their financial advantage by men. Another case of the new male abuses, which is not much discussed by feminists, is linked to the wide access of females to wage employment. Women have entered the workforce in droves in the last decades, and the figures about this presence of women in the workforce are interesting. According to the sources I found, the UK is a country where the participation of women in the workforce is the highest. In 2020, 72.3 women worked in wage employment in the UK, but half of these jobs were part-time. The percentage is less in France. It's 67.6%, but interestingly, only 1/4 of these working women work part-time. And it's also interesting to know that the US apparently has the lowest percentage of working women. It's about 57%. And of course, women in the workforce are still paid less than men. It's 25% on average in the UK, and it's roughly the same in France. Most women earn a salary, and when they marry or live with a man, this salary is used to pay the common expenses of the couple, the rent, the food, the expenses for children. From what I read, more and more from women, when they enter heterosexual coupling, they are often requested by their partner to share the common expenses 50-50, despite the fact that their salary is significantly lower. So women share the common expenses of the couple equally or almost equally, despite the fact that their salaries are lower. And from what I've read, this gap is not really closing. It's been saying the same for several years. But nevertheless, women continue to take care of the same share of domestic work. Their share of domestic work has not diminished. It's been stuck at about 70% of the chores relatively to men. Men do a little bit more domestic chores nowadays, but the workload of women has increased slightly, so their percentage of these chores has not changed. When I was a kid, I was raised in a middle-class family in provincial France in the 50s. And in all the families my parents were seeing socially, none of the wives worked. The only working woman I knew was a young widow who had to work to raise her children. The normative marriage contract at the time was similar to the slave contract. The terms of the contract was unpaid work of the wife, domestic, sexual, reproductive, emotional, in exchange for a maintenance by her husband. Husband paid for the upkeep of the children and wives. Of course, this form of exchange was grossly unfair. The contribution of the wife was more important, and she was dependent, but it was an exchange. There was a degree of reciprocity. In the 21st century couple, the husband still benefits of the unpaid domestic work of his wife, but he doesn't have to pay for her maintenance in return. That's what I call the new unilateral marriage contract. The normative marriage contract still implies obligation for the woman, but not so much for the man, or not at all, in fact. When you think about it, it looks like a slave master whose slaves would still be working for him, but he would no longer have to feed them and lodge them. It's another net financial gain for men. And it's a pattern which is typical of neo-patriarchy. Men keep their rights and control, but they unload some of their traditional responsibilities on women. And the increased exploitation of women by males is even clearer when it comes to motherhood. There is this new image in the popular culture, the hen father, le papa poule in French, the doting father. Magazines talk about this new father. Images circulate in the media of a young bearded man holding a baby against his muscular chest in his muscular arms in the posture of a virgin with child. We are told that these fathers are expert at changing diapers, at checking the proper temperature of milk on the back of their hand, and women are ecstatic when they see a man pushing a pram in a park. But it's an image which is very far from reality. Not only there is no equal sharing of the task when the couple live together, but the involvement of the father is also different in nature. Fathers don't do many of the care chores. What they do is the smart, educative, fun activities, reading to the child, playing with him, watching or doing sports with him. And they never assume the mental load of organizing the care and activities of the child. It's always the mother's work, and it's only under her supervision and planning that the father does things for his child. It helps the mother, but she's always the organizer. So the image of the new father is a patriarchal inversion. These fathers may exist, but they are a rarity. The realities of modern fatherhood, as they appear in the statistics, are the exact opposite of this image of the new father. For instance, who gets up at night when the baby wakes up and cries? In France, it's a mother in 80% of the cases. 50% of the fathers never get up at night to take care of a crying baby. And when a child is sick, it's a mother who takes a leave from work to take care of him. The proportion of men who do that is close to zero. It's a mother who talks to the teacher when the child has a problem in school, etc., etc. In France, after the birth of a baby, working parents have a paid leave of 28 days, out of which 5 are compulsory. The amount of money they received is based on the salaries of the last 3 months. The mother take the whole 28 days, and then take another parental leave, which can last up to 3 years. After this parental leave, some of them give up working entirely, while others decide to work part-time, with the reduced income it implies. The men take the 5 compulsory days, but almost none of them takes the other 20 days of the leave. That says a lot about the real investment of the new fathers with their child. It's when parents divorce that this gap in the parents' involvement with the children becomes abysmal. There is an important difference between France and the UK when it comes to the custody of children after a separation. In the UK, there is a single custody, usually to the mother, in 93% of the cases. In France, there is a single custody only for 71% of the cases, and judiciary and social system seems much more geared to the protection of fathers' rights. What happens typically in France after a separation is that in 80% of the cases, there is an agreement between the parents as to how to organize the custody of the child. Then the family court judge just validates this arrangement. If the separation is conflictual, then the judge decides in the best interest of the child, and the choice by default is almost always shared custody, also called shuttle custody, because the child goes back and forth between the mother and the father. Shared custody means equal time spent with the father and the mother. The reason why judges decide in favor of shared custody quite often in the context of a conflictual separation is because fathers almost always ask for it. 18.8% of the fathers asked for it, and 17.3 get it, and the judge grants it to them almost automatically. The reform, it's very interesting to know that the reform about shared custody has been passed in 2002. It's been passed by a woman, Ségolène Royal, who was a minister of the family, and it was passed under the pressure of father rights associations. And apparently Ségolène Royal was convinced by their arguments. And it's such a major victory for men that it's been named the SOS Papa law, because the main association for father rights in France is called SOS Papa. And so, as I say, it's so much in favor of fathers' rights that nearly all fathers in conflictual situation ask for it, and they get it. And so why is it so much in favor of fathers and men in general? The main point is very unfair to mothers. Because, as I said, when the father demands this shared custody, they get it. And so, of course, the judge validates this, and in this case, the mother has to accept it. They have no choice. But, it's very unfair, because when fathers don't want to get involved with their child, they don't ask for it, so they don't get it. But a woman has to accept the husband and the judge decision whether they want it or not. She has no choice. The father has the choice, the mother has no choice. So it's one first thing why it's so much to the advantage of men. And it's interesting also to know, and it's been noted by pedopsychiatrist Maurice Berger, that when fathers get shared custody, they don't take care of the child themselves. It's their new girlfriend or their mother or a nanny who does. So they are not requesting child custody to take care of the child themselves, but to claim their right on the child and to get even with the mother. Shared custody is most of all very advantageous financially for fathers. The expenses for the child are shared by law 50-50 between the father and the mother, despite the fact that mothers have on average lower salaries. And lots of mothers also have to stop working altogether and live on welfare or part-time. But they still do lots more for the child than the father. Very often, as before, it's still the mother who takes the kid to the dentist, talks to his teacher, etc. So like as above, women pay an equal share for the child, but they provide lots more care work. Also, if there is shared custody, most fathers don't have to pay child support. And if there is child support, it's not, and when it's not paid or paid very irregularly by nearly 50% of the fathers. And even if they don't pay child support, they keep the shared custody. And anyway, the average child support is very low anyway. It's about 180 pounds per month. And if the father don't pay, Social Security, specifically the CAF, can withdraw directly the amount from their bank account. But many fathers manage to escape that. They open different accounts, they move to a foreign country, and so forth. And also the paperwork involved is so huge that some women just give up. They don't ask, that Social Security withdraw the money directly from the father's bank account. So if you look at the statistics, it appears that the number of families led by a single parent has been growing steadily in France. In the 80s, it was about 10%. Now it's more than 25%. And most of these single parent families are single mothers families, about 85%. The statistics for the UK are about the same. 1/4 of families are single parent families, and 84% of these single parent families are headed by women. And of course, to be a single mother is a gateway to poverty. Many of these mothers live under the poverty line, 43% in the UK, about the same in France. The difference with France is that the number of single mothers keeps growing in France, whereas it's been declining slightly in the UK. And I really don't know why, wonder why. Many of these women are unemployed, and in the US, they live on food stamps. And the percentage of single mothers is particularly high among Blacks and Native American women in the US. Another financial bonus of single custody for men, they get half of the allocation familiale, which are paid by the state to mothers. And if they pay child support to the mother, she has to declare this money to the tax administration as income, whereas the fathers can claim it as a deduction. So the system of shared custody has been presented by Fathers' Rights Association as egalitarian, even as feminist, because in the text of the law, the responsibilities for the child, financial and otherwise, are shared 50-50 between fathers and mothers. And some feminists fell for it. Of course, it's not true. As I said, if the mothers are indeed supposed to contribute equally to the children upkeep, they are still the ones who do more care work. Feminists know that any attempt to treat very unequal categories equally will only increase the existing inequality between them. That's what happened with the shared custody law. Equal doesn't mean fair. And if we look more closely at this situation, we see again the same pattern. In the recent past, men did not get involved in the daily care of children, which was entirely left to the mothers, but they paid for the maintenance of the child. Nowadays, while the father and the mother live together, the expenses for the child are shared equally or close to equally, whereas the care of the children is still the responsibility of the mother with little help or no help from the father, and the father helps mostly for the fun part and under the supervision of the mother. In the case of maman solo, single mothers, the picture is even more clear. The single mother shoulders the whole burden of the child, the care and the expenses. It looks like the responsibility of raising a child has been totally transferred to the mothers, and we can talk here of men's flight from the responsibilities of fatherhood. Men's flight from fatherhood means women being trapped in motherhood even more than before, as the responsibilities abandoned by fathers have to be shouldered by mothers, and being a single mother often means poverty. So it's a major demographic evolution, and not many feminists, and of course nobody talks about that, or it's hardly talked about in the media. And again, it's definitely not in the favor of women. And also, I would like to underline that shared custody, the by default solution when a separation is conflictual, is not only bad for the psychological development of children, it's also absurd and even sadistic to force a woman who asked for a divorce because her partner was abusive and violent to stay in touch and meet regularly with him after a separation, because the child has to be handed to him and taken back several times a month. These contacts with his ex-wife are an opportunity for the man to be abusive, controlling, and violent again with her. Also, it's the opportunity for him to start arguments about each decision regarding the child. Mothers have been assaulted by their ex during these meetings, some even murdered. Also, in a situation of shared custody, a mother loses her freedom to move as she wishes, which is a basic human right. Even if she's unemployed and she's offered a job in a different city, She cannot accept it because she has to stay close to the father's residence. She can't take the child with her on vacation or change his school without her ex agreement either. So I would say that this law, like some other laws that which have been passed under the guise of being pro-women, in fact, is quite the opposite. And to me, it's part of the general counter-strike of patriarchy against the advances of women's rights, just like, in fact, a gender identity ideology and like incels. So it's part of a whole, I would say. And we should see it as such. It's not something which is isolated. It's a system. And in fact, in my book, I deal with other laws which are also basically presented as pro-women, but in fact work against them. Thank you.
Are your books available in English?
No. I could, because the first book I wrote about prostitution, it includes a narration by former, survivors of prostitution who are, of course, French, but also German, British, American, Canadian. So a lot of these testimonies were originally in English. And so I just, commented them and just sort of tried to draw general conclusions about what they said, but a lot of these testimonies were originally in English. So again, I think this book would be easier, in fact, to be translated in English, because a lot of the texts were, in fact, translated from English from French.
Francine runs a site, Revolution Feministe, which is that, do you upload new ideas and new articles regularly on that site?
And the last interview I did, which is published on the site, is an interview with Sheila Jeffreys, and she's talking about her last book, which is, as usual, extremely interesting. And I would like very much this book to be translated in French, and we are working on it. And but it's really a scandal that no books by Sheila have been translated in French. I can't understand, because as far as I know, they've been translated in German and maybe in Spanish or something like that.
Spanish, definitely, yeah. And Korean.
Yeah. Oh, very interesting. But to go back to what I said about this shared custody, I hope such a law is not passed in the UK, because if it's a case, feminists have to mobilize against it, because there's so much against women's and mothers' interest, and the worst that is been presented as, well, a new law, perfect equality between fathers and mothers, a step forward for women. Well, it's just the opposite. That's why I call my talk the poison gift of patriarchy, because it was presented as a gift to women, but it's just, it's just poison, in fact.